Hello, I'm going to show you how to take this photo of a red kite and edit it in Lightroom so it could potentially be put up on a wall in an office or entered into a calendar. Now I took the opportunity to hedge my bets and get the best possible chance of photographing these amazing birds by going to a red kite feeding centre somewhere in Wales where they put food out for the birds and over 400 to 500 birds all swoop down to collect the food. Even so, I'd taken over 1,100 photos during my hour-long session and then whittled them down to about 20 great photos with potentially about 5 amazing photos out of that 1,100. So hats off to photographers that go out into the wilderness and spend days, even weeks photographing one bird. Before we edit this photo, I have got a head start as I've actually got some of the rules incorporated into this photo that are essential for great birds in flight photography. I'm at eye level with the bird, so I'm not pointing and shooting up into the sky where the bird just turns out to be a dark silhouette against a bright sky. And the great thing is the background was also out of focus and the subject was sharp as I had the lens open at its fastest aperture, which is its widest at 5.6. This means that there is great separation between the subject and the background, which we can also work on in Lightroom. Now, before we get started, there is some technical aspects to photographing birds in flight. I used my Sigma 150 to 600mm lens, and I'm pretty sure for this photo I was zoomed all the way out at the maximum focal length of 600mm, which also adds to the shallow depth of field. And with the trees in the background being a considerable distance away from the subject, this aided even more in getting that rich, creamy, out of focus background. Now, part of the reason why the bird is so sharp in the frame, even though it was probably going close to 100 miles an hour, is I had a high shutter speed. I think on the day my shutter speed was about 2,000ths of a second. I also, as mentioned, had the aperture wide open to get that shallow depth of field, but I had my ISO or my camera gain set to automatic, so I didn't have to worry too much about the exposure. The ISO would adjust for me. Now, if the ISO goes high, you will tend to get more noise on your photo. Now, it's always better to go home with slightly noisy photos because your ISO was high rather than trying to decrease your shutter speed and let in more light. If you decrease your shutter speed, you are guaranteed to get motion blur on your birds in flight. Remember, we can sort out noise to a certain degree in post. I'm not going to go into detail about the spot metering or the focus modes when out on the shoot because today is all about editing the photo in Lightroom, so let's crack on and do that. Now I've included a link to the raw photo in the description of this video, so if you want to open that up and follow along and practice, that'd be great. However, if you've got your own methods or better ways of doing things that you see in this video, I'm always learning, so I'd be glad to know. So please leave a comment below and let me know your thoughts. Now, if you want to give me a thumbs up, that would be great because it helps get the video out there to other people. And if you want to stay posted on my video uploads, please subscribe. That would be great. Thank you. Okay, so first thing, let's open up Lightroom, which I've got open up here already, and I'm on version 7.5. Now I've got the raw file on my desktop, so I'm just going to move Lightroom over and import the file into Lightroom. Let's just maximize that. Okay, so we're going to add the photo into Lightroom like so. So the very first thing I'm going to do before I start any editing is go to all the way to the top, and the profile I'm going to set to Adobe standard because I don't want any color correction whatsoever on the photo. I'm going to do that. The next thing I'm going to do is just to crop this in and give it a good composition. So we're going to imagine that this is going to be printed out onto a canvas, or it's going to be displayed somewhere in a calendar maybe. So I'm thinking that we get a 5:4 ratio, flip it to portrait and bring it in just because I don't want to get some of that stark white background the background's a little bit overexposed, but the most important thing was the bird. So I'm going to bring it into about there, and I'm going to make the body of the bird roughly in the middle. Because the bird's got its wings spread out from top to bottom, it makes sense to have the photo or the canvas a little bit higher than it is wider, and it just displays that magnificent wingspan. If the bird was in more of a flying pose or like progressing through the frame, then I would kind of, let me just show you, if I go to custom, I would give the bird a bit of a headroom to fly into, and that works well with birds in flight. Giving the bird room in front of it for it to fly into always works wonders, but again, experiment and find your own way. So let's just undo those changes. So at the moment I'm relatively happy with the crop. Remember, nothing's permanent and we can always change it. Now what I want to do is I want to separate the background from the red kite a lot further. So I'm going to create a couple of masks, one for the background and one for the bird. So let's head over to the masking tool, and I'm going to let Lightroom choose the background for me. So if I press background and just let it do its thing, it's done a pretty good job of selecting the background. Now if I hold space and click on the mouse to zoom, it hasn't quite maxed out some of the space between the wing tips of the bird, but if it's a problem we can always go back and airbrush the mask, but that's maybe for another video. We're just going to keep this simple and just edit this. So now that it's got the background, before I do any adjustments to the color or the exposure, I'm going to copy and invert this mask so I catch or mask the red kite. So it's created mask 1 for us. Let's just click on the 3 dots and then we'll just duplicate and invert the mask like so. Now what I'm going to do is go back to the background mask and we'll start to work on the background first. So the very first thing I'm going to do on this background is just brighten it up a little bit and just bring the exposure by 3/4 of a stop to around about 75. That should do it. Let's just click show overlay off so we can see what we're doing a bit more clearer. Then I just want to lower the contrast slightly because I want to just take the edge off the black dark areas in the trees. But I think when we come on to texture, dehaze and clarity, we'll sort that out. So now if I scroll down to effects, you'll see as soon as I put the texture down, it softens out that background. That's fully up, that's fully down, and it's kind of got rid of some of the noise for us, but we'll sort the noise out shortly. The clarity I'm going to put down to about there, about 69, 70, just to soften that background even further. And with the dehaze, I'm just going to bring it down ever so slightly, just to add a bit of atmosphere between the bird and the trees, say about -10. It doesn't look like we've got much contrast in the photo overall, but I'm going to make the subject or the red kite pop. So to do that, I'm going to go to the mask for the red kite. And I'm just going to lower the exposure down slightly to darken her. I'm just going to increase the shadows just to bring out a bit of detail on the darker parts of the wings. And I'm just going to bring my highlights down just to maintain the highlights and not let them be blown out by the fact that I've increased the shadows. Now the lighter parts of the feathers, I just want to emphasize the whiteness of those. So I'm just going to bring my whites up slightly to about there. And then to get the contrast, I'm going to bring the blacks or the darker area of the feathers down, and you can see the effect that that's having. So it's a bit like adjusting the contrast, but you've got a little bit more control. Now that looks great, but if I look at it, I'm thinking, well, the background looks a bit flat, looks a bit 2D. It's almost like you've put the bird up against one of those canvases and done a photo shoot in a studio. So we're going to add a bit of 3 dimension to the background. Now, remember from before we cropped it, there was quite bright sky here, so I'm thinking on the day from memory the light was coming in from top right. So what we're going to do is darken top left. So if we create a new mask with a background, and then this time we're going to click on the three dots and we're going to intersect this mask using a linear gradient. Now we're going to click and drag our linear gradient up about halfway with a nice smooth roll off, and then if you look at the mask here you'll see that it's captured the background and ignored the bird. And what we're going to do quite simply is just get the exposure, lower that down till it looks about right about there, and then that look makes the background look a lot more three-dimensional. Now I'm not going to over edit this photo, I'm quite happy with that, and from the get-go it was quite a decent forgiving picture to work with. You'll see if I put up on the screen now that I took 1,000 or more photos, and a lot of them are just going to go straight in the recycling bin. The only thing I'm going to do, if I zoom in, the noise is high on this photo, and remember I said it's better to go home with slightly noisy photos than it is to have get the light increased by lowering the shutter speed and have just motion blur, because these birds can move up to well over 100 miles an hour when they're diving down for their prey. So I'm going to do a bit of sharpening, but not too much. So on the main edit tab, if we go down to sharpening, I'm just going to increase this just so it nips that detail, and it's also kind of sharpened the noise. So let's get rid of the noise using the denoise feature within Lightroom. So if we click on the denoise and let it just do its thing, now it gives you a preview, and let's just look at the face or the head of the red kite, because that's going to be one of the main focuses in the photo, and let's just see what kind of job this does. Okay, so if we look at the background, it's done a good job of getting rid of most of the noise. So let's enhance this and see what we get. Okay, cool, so it's done its thing, and the background looks nice and sweet and soft, and we've still got the detail on the feathers and the birds, so I would be pretty happy with that. I could put it on a canvas and put it up on a wall somewhere, or it would look good in a calendar or in a magazine. And that's it. As you saw, I didn't really over edit it. I just made subtle changes just to bring out the subject and make it pop and give that nice creamy bokeh in the background. So I hope you've enjoyed editing this photo with me. If you have, remember to give me a thumbs up, and if you want to subscribe, I will be posting videos on how I shot these amazing red kites. Feel free to comment, I'd love to know your thoughts, and until next time, thank you for watching.